Neutron's output section hosts the input and output level controls, the meters, and the output limiter. The meters in Neutron should be familiar to users of other iZotope products. It's a combined peak and average meter showing average levels in light gray and peak levels in darker gray. There's also a persistent overload indicator. But here you do get two choices of how the average levels are calculated. In the options window, you can choose between RMS plus peak and short-term plus peak. Short-term is one of the alternate methods for calculating average level that's sometimes used when complying with mandated loudness normalization standards. In that same options pane, you'll find the Detect True Peaks switch. True peak refers to a modern method of detecting potential peak overages that's a bit more stringent than the usual method employed by digital peak meters. A maximum true peak level of around -1 is another spec whose adherence is mandated for audio intended for broadcast and streaming, and its use is recommended. The limiter has 3 algorithms, some derived from iZotope's mastering processors. There are also 3 additional options that select different responses for slightly different limiting characteristics. Actually, if you choose to hit the limiter a lot harder for effect, the differences are fairly pronounced, as we'll see in a minute. The 3 algorithms are labeled IRC-LL, IRC-2, and HARD. LL means low latency. It's a low latency limiter design. IRC-2 is probably the most transparent general purpose limiter. It adapts to the incoming audio to preserve apparent transient impact even while reducing peaks, so it would be a good choice for a simple peak control at the end of the plugin chain. People who've used iZotope's Ozone mastering suite will recognize this from there. In fact, Ozone also has an IRC-3 and 4, but those are more optimized for loudness maximizing on a stereo master, so IRC-2 was probably the best overall choice for transparent limiting. HARD is described as a more traditional soft clipping limiter, which could be good for individual instruments. It's also the one of the limiter options that can be run in 0 latency mode. Pushed hard, it'll probably color the sound more than IRC-2, but that can be a good thing, especially when you're limiting an individual track rather than an entire mix. In fact, while you could simply engage the limiter to avoid overloads, if you pull down the threshold to lower levels, you can apply limiting as more of an effect, and it does quite a good job of that. That's where the various options really distinguish themselves from one another. You can hear how LL results in softer transients, while IRC-2 is a bit tighter and more transparent. And HARD yields a punchier result. Besides these 3 algorithms, the limiter also has 3 additional options: clear, thick, and smooth, each of which changes the response for even more variety, especially when using limiting as an effect. The differences between these options and the limiter algorithms can be subtle, but sometimes one or the other can be just the ticket for getting, say, a drum kit to sit back in or cut through a busy mix to just the right degree. At the bottom of the output section, there are a few basic controls: a mono switch, polarity flip, and channel swap, and a pan setting and stereo width control. Note that the level, pan, and width controls can be accessed and controlled by the Visual Mixer plugin, which we'll look at in a later video. Next up, I'll start looking at Neutron 3's intelligent features, beginning with the new Sculptor module.